So this is my reading, commentary, and reflection on Plato's dialogue, The Sophist. This is part 4 in the series. So the question is, where do we begin from where we left off? It can be quite difficult to determine exactly how to resume a previous episode or to continue it. Is it a matter of explaining everything that we have discussed, have come to? Is it a matter of just picking up from where I left off? Sometimes it's difficult to say. But I'd like to provide an image, perhaps a brief image, of what some of the things that we've experienced so far. This dialogue has two different sections, it would seem. The first is our primary exploration that mimics the dividing root-like structure of reason that we were exposed to. Between two people, we have a visitor, and we have Theaetetus, who's an Athenian youth. The visitor is from a Greek colony in Italy. And what we are interested in finding is the Sophist, defining him, hunting him, it would seem. We've come to a few things, a few ideas about this person. He's an expert in a certain type of thing. He's an expert in deception. He wishes to find that which is true. He makes his living as a communicator. But he makes his living corrupting the minds of the youths into believing something that is not, something that is false. And so, what has come to be is this relationship between that which is true and that which is not, or that which is and that which is not. And there's all sorts of interesting avenues to explore between that relationship of that which is it, of that which is and that which is not. Right now, we are debating a fundamental source, let's say, a belief of Parmenides, and of a few different tribes. So I don't wish to go too far into where we have been, but I think that that provides at least somewhat of a summary of where we are. And so, where we are now is trying to understand the cultural heritage, let's say, of the visitor, and of Theaetetus perhaps, that there's going to be a debate about the relationship of that which is to that which is not, how this expresses itself in society, why and how perhaps it influences us on an individual level. So the visitor, he says, they've overlooked the many of us and belittled us. They've simply been talking their way through their explanations without paying any attention to whether we were following them or were left behind. And of this he is speaking of the principled philosophers of the various Greek heritage cultures that he had mentioned in the last paragraph. Of them are the Eleatics, of which I think the visitor is a part of. The Ionians. And there is one more. Sicilians, I believe. Yes. But generally he's speaking about the principled philosophers, regardless of where they're from. So I discussed this a little bit as a part of our last episode. And I'm also going to try a different type of interpretation for the first part of this episode, probably. We'll see how it works out, maybe for the entirety of the thing. Traditionally, I've been going through 1 page or 2 pages at a time, reading it and then going back to interpret. But here I'm just going to go line by line, paragraph by paragraph. I will specify who is speaking. So Theaetetus follows up the visitor's comment, and he says, "What do you mean?" For heaven's sake, Theaetetus, do you understand anything of what they mean each time one of them says that many or one or two things are, or have become, or are becoming, or when another one speaks of hot mixed with cold, and supposes that there are separations and combinations? Earlier in my life, I used to think I understood exactly what someone meant when he said just what we are confused about now, namely, this is not. You do see what confusion we are in about it. So let's break this down, the visitor is saying here. So obviously he's a bit frustrated at Theaetetus. He doesn't quite understand how the visitor feels belittled, left behind by important scholarly figures. Part of this could be because of the age difference between Theaetetus and the visitor. The visitor is a philosopher. He has spent a lot of time thinking and trying to understand and to grow. And so it would make sense that he's a bit upset if he's feeling left behind. So the axis, understanding of what the philosophers mean when they say that many or one or two things are, or have become, or are becoming. Now we've spent a lot of time so far reflecting on that which is and that which is not. There's a close relationship between that which is and that which is not to becoming. Unbecoming perhaps is part of the equation as well, but we haven't seen becoming as much, but it is certainly there is a strong relationship between that which is and becoming. We can also say that there is a relationship between becoming and that which is not. So for my part, when I think about something that has become or is becoming, it implies some procedure or some process. Becoming is an experience. It is something that unfolds over time. For one thing to become another, change must take place. There are shifts, depending on the experience. There are shifts in some fundamental structural principles, I think. We can examine this on many layers, on many levels. We could think about the evolution of animals. We can think about the maturation of mind. We can think about, in adulthood, the various experiences and how we change over time. How we learn to accept or fail to live up to what we are called to. Now there's another thing that I'd like to draw the attention to. He mentions things that are, or things that have become, or things that are becoming. So there's an element of perspective here that includes the dimension of time. Things that are right now, immediate. Things that have become indicates a process of becoming that is finished. And then our becoming is currently going through the process, through which that which is to come, lies or rests within the future. He says, or when another one speaks of hot mixed with cold, and supposes that there are separations and combinations, so much like what we've been discussing about that which is not and that which is, it has been my contention that the particular relationship of that which is not to that which is that which is not is subordinate to that which is. That which is necessarily uses that which is not for the very process of becoming. And so we can have this process of separation because of something that exists, or that thing that is, that which is. And combinations, this coming to be, we have the thought of two identities, something that is hot and something that is cold, being mixed together. What happens to their identities when things come together? How do they change? How do they become? What happens to the previous identities? You do see what confusion we are in about it, says the visitor. Theaetetus responds, yes, I do. But just perhaps the very same thing has happened to us equally about is. We say we are in the clear about it, and that we understand when someone says it, but that we don't understand is not. But maybe we're in the same state about both. So before moving forward, I would like to propose a question. What is there that is difficult to understand about that which is not? Our inroad to this at least from the dialogue standpoint, has been that in order to refer to something as not, to identify it, that which is not, it implies that there is something there. There is something intelligible. And that nothingness, while the meaning of it implies that there is no thing, the very identification of it means that it is something. And this is where I've maintained that it seems that way because that which is subordinates it. It makes it possible among things that are. And he says, but maybe we're in the same state about both. Maybe we're having difficulty understanding that which is and that which is not. Theaetetus says maybe. The visitor says, and let's suppose the same thing may be true about the other expressions we've just used. All right. We can look into most of them later, if that seems to be the best thing to do. Now we'll think about the most fundamental and the most important expression. Which one? Says Theaetetus. Oh, obviously you're saying that being is the one we have to explore first. Then we have to ask what people who say it think they are indicating by it. The visitor says, you understand exactly, Theaetetus. I'm saying we have to follow the track this way. Let's ask, as if they were here. Listen, you people who say that all things are just some two things, hot and cold, or some such pair. What are you saying about them both when you say that they both are, and each one is? What shall we take this being to be? Is it a third thing alongside those two things, so that according to everything is no longer two but three? Surely, in calling one or the other of the two of them being, you aren't saying that they both are, since then in either case they'd be one and not two. So let's reflect on the content of this piece by the visitor. He says, listen, you people who say that all things are just some two things, hot and cold, or some such pair. Now why are we saying some such two things? Well, that there must be two as a necessary condition. And the question is, well, what is two a necessary condition for? Because what is followed up, the question that follows this up, asks about the identity of the two being one, and then the ability to identify those two components separately. Let's say hot and cold versus hot and cold together. And so this comes down to a question of identity. The condition of being the same as something else. The character or qualities that make a person or thing what it is. The state of being oneself, not another. In the etymological sense, identity, as it comes from the Middle French, is sameness or oneness. From the Latin, we have identitas, meaning sameness or oneness again. The prefix idem is the same. Itas, the Latin suffix, gives us a sense of its essence, its qualities, let's say. So when we have this term, identity, which holds within it the idea of what we're talking about now, of identifying things by their characteristics, how can it be that we can take two things of different characteristics and call them one? Now, we do this all the time. Conceptually, I think it becomes a harder problem to work our way through, but it's obvious, based on our experience, that if I take I myself, I am a multitude of different identities, let's say, but there's a principal identity at the top, which I call me, or I, that is the driver of this biological organism. I could take my arm and my leg, and I can say, well, these are two separate things. They do not share sameness in their form, and yet they are part of a singular identity. But they can also maintain a distinct identity. What the difference is where the attention goes. What the mind chooses to identify. There is enough difference between an arm and a leg to identify difference and separation. But there's enough unity among the different parts to call myself one thing. What are you saying about them both when you say that they are that both are and each one is? What shall we take this being to be? Is it a third thing alongside those two things, so that according to you everything is no longer two but three? So let's think about this for a moment. We're asking the question, what is this being? Is it potentially a third thing? So etymologically, let's define this first. Being, we have, number one, existence. The state or fact of existing. We have entity, a thing that exists. We have essence, what makes a thing what it is. Now, throughout the etymological chain of being, there is, from the Proto-Indo-European, to be, to grow, to exist. To grow is an interesting addition to the original meaning, is existence, essence, and that which exists. And the fusion between these Indo-European streams gives us the static existence, the is, the I am, the essence, and the one of emergence and growth, becoming and being. I think we can ask the question about the difference between being and that which is. For surely that which is includes being, but being is something that may go beyond just that which is. It certainly exists. It is certainly subject to change, being. And I suppose we can use a similar language to that which is. But being seems to imply a bit more of a dynamic experience than that which is. We don't necessarily need to overcomplicate it. But existing, being, is quite a bizarre thing. A surreal thing. Something so simple, when thought about enough, seems so wondrous and perhaps slightly painful at times, that this experience and this existence just is. All of the questions in the world seem to butt up against it, but never really give a satisfactory answer. So to the second point about potentially being a third being alongside these two beings, so that according to you, everything is no longer two, but three. This threeness is that third identity, I would say, the being of hot and cold together. Surely in calling one or the other of the two, of them being, you aren't saying that they both are, since then, in either case, they'd be one and not two. Theaetetus responds, that's true, but you do want to call both of them being. Theaetetus says probably. But, we'll say, if you did that, friends, you'd also be saying very clearly that the two are one. Theaetetus says that's absolutely right. Then clarify this for us, since we're confused about it. What do you want to signify when you say being? Obviously, you've known for a long time. We thought we did, but now we're confused about it. So first teach it to us, so we won't think we understand what you're saying, when just the contrary is the case. Would it be the least bit inappropriate for us to ask them this? And anyone else who says that everything is more than one? Theaetetus says, not at all. Well, then, shouldn't we do our best to find out from the people who say that everything is one what they mean by being? Of course. Then they should answer this question. Do you say that only one thing is? We do, they'll say, won't they? Yes. Well then, you call something being? Yes. Is that just what you call one, so that you use two names for the same thing, or what? How will they answer that question, says Theaetetus. Obviously, it's not the easiest thing in the world to answer that question, or any other question, either, for someone who makes the supposition that they do. Why not? Surely it's absurd for someone to agree that there are two names when he maintains that there's only one thing. Of course. And it's completely absurd and unacceptable for someone to say that there's a name if there's no account of it. What do you mean? If he supposes that a thing is different from its name, then surely he's mentioning two things. Yes. And moreover, if he supposes that the name is the same as the thing, he'll either be forced to say that the name is the name of nothing, or else, if he says that it's the name of something, then it's the name of nothing other than itself, and so will turn out to be only the name of a name and nothing else. Theaetetus says yes. So before we go any farther, I want to think about a couple things on the previous page. Since we have just begun another 2 pages here, I'm probably going to revert to the traditional reading of those 2 pages and then interpret. But for now, I want to finish the previous page that we are on. So we have this a group of people that maintain that which is one. And we have this equivalence that is drawn by the visitor when he plays devil's advocate, or when he represents the position of the other people. Maybe I shouldn't say devil's advocate, but position of the other parties. There's the equivalence that you call something being. I'm glad that there's this distinction, because I was operating under that assumption for some earlier reflections. Now, the interesting question is when the visitor asks, is that just what you call one, so that you can use 2 names for the same thing, or what? So I want to sit with this for a moment. The two-ness that is mentioned here, I'm not really sure it's all that significant, in a way. But we have sort of a semantic beginning here. We are trying to determine how much of language that is being used, that is wrapped up in oneness, can be mistaken by another to be some multiplicity, more than one, when in reality that which is named by other things is just one thing. But all of the other names are hollow. It's hard to imagine how this would be the case. My mind immediately goes to that graduated, related sense of oneness, in which there is a maintenance of identities that are below the singular. Below the singular, there exists this multiplicitous structure that comes into being, that may fall into absence, and this process continues. But anyway, we have yet to really explore the details of that assertion. The visitor says, obviously it's not the easiest thing in the world to answer, or any other question, for someone who makes the supposition that they do. And he says it's absurd for someone to agree that there are two names when he maintains that there's only one thing. So the two-ness is important here in the mind of the visitor. And it's completely absurd and unacceptable for someone to say that there's a name if there's no account of it. But this goes back to the heart of what we were talking about nothing, or no thing. There's a name for something that doesn't exist. Well, how can it, if it doesn't exist, how can it have a name? How can it be represented? And maybe perhaps that is not the best way of thinking about it, because we have many words for things about, or at least a conception of something that may not be. We think about it in terms of our perception, the ways in which we can be deceived by reality and have a false perception within our minds. I'm reminded of an expression or a conversation that I was listening to recently with Jeffrey Hinton. I'm not his greatest admirer, however, this topic did come up about the internal sphere, and I'm trying to remember what his explanation was, but it was an interesting reflection nonetheless about the false view of having an internal theater that exists independent of that which is outside of it, perhaps. This is a point, surely, that we will come to. For when we discuss being and non-being, or thingness and no-thingness, that which is in mind may be attributed to falsehood. And we've gone through this also before, that falsehood is sort of the opposite of that which is true, the opposite of that which is. We could say that which is not, that which cannot be. But of course there are plenty of things that are, except they don't match to that which is, in the sense of that which is in the objective domain, in the domain that is independent of some mistake. But much like my assertion about nothingness and somethingness, there is a dependency in that relationship. That something is the Father, let's say, and that nothing is subservient to that Father. participates only because of its existence. If he supposes that a thing is different from its name, then surely he's meaning two things. So what would it mean then necessarily to have a thing that is different from its name? I think about naming. I think about the names of people, but I also think about the names of objects. And in the context about the names of individuals, of people, I find it a curious thing, because in our culture, in America, we all have names. Some of us have names for which there is an underlying meaning to it. I suppose all names have meaning to a degree. But there seems to be a cultural trend for which people pick names because of the aesthetics, how it sounds, sometimes what it means, maybe often what it means. But the name for a child, it would seem something that is grown into, rather than something that is picked immediately for them to grow into. Because it's not as though the name is going to be the thing that holds them. Their freedom of action, the experiences that they have with their parents, and the development throughout life is going to determine how they are, who they decide to be. But it is a good thing that we have certain names, that names become more by association than they are by the meaning of the word that is that name. Now, if there was a name that was completely opposite to the being or to the behavior or to the purpose of something, then that would be a curious thing. Like if a person's name was Faith, but they were atheistic, it would seem that there would be some sort of contradiction there in terms of the meaning of the word and what they believed. But of course everybody has faith in something, so maybe not the best example. But I have a remote control here. If I give this remote control the name water bottle, and I used it in common language, it would be a very confusing thing. I would say, can you grab me that water bottle? People wouldn't be able to find it. They wouldn't be able to recognize something that is named incorrectly. The remote control serves a different purpose than the water bottle. And we can ask ourselves, why do we name things like water bottle or remote control? And I think that we can find some rational reasons why we do so. And we can keep on going down that chain. And eventually we can identify things for which the name doesn't really match some of the fundamental characteristics of the object, while they may represent the purpose of the object. Like remote control, for example, it doesn't say much about the type of material that it is made out of. The physical structure, it doesn't say much. It's the interaction among the parts that form the cohesive identity that we are concerned with. The same is true for the water bottle. The water bottle is this thing that is meant to be filled with the substance, that is water, and it is a bottle for which we understand by convention the shape to be such that it may hold a liquid. Again, named for its purpose. But just to reiterate, if I were to name something different from its purpose, it would lead to the misidentification of the thing. And in fact, a failure of identification in general a failure of identity, a failure to recognize sameness, a failure to recognize participating parts in a singular identity. The visitor says, and moreover, if he supposes that the name is the same as the thing, he'll either be forced to say that the name is the name of nothing, or else, if he says that it's the name of something, then it's the name of nothing other than itself, and so will turn out to be only the name of a name and nothing else. So kind of a confusing expression there, but this is the last one that I want to work my way through before reading the next 2 pages. So we are supposing now that the name is the same as the thing. So I'm holding a remote control. I'm calling it a remote control. But is this what we mean? Is this what the visitor means? I think we might have to think about this in a little bit more detail. Because I don't think that the remote control, the name, is the same thing as the object remote control that I manipulate in my hands. Now, why would we say that there's a difference between the name and the object? Because the name is a representation. The remote is not a representation of itself. Well, maybe we can say that it is to some level, but it is not an abstraction away from itself. The remote is as it is. The name is apart from it. The remote's purpose and function will still continue despite being called something else. I can call it a water bottle. I can press the on switch and the television will turn on. However, if the name and the object were the same thing, and I went to call the object the water bottle, and went to press on it, the TV wouldn't turn on because there would be no buttons. It would be full of water because it would be the water bottle. And moreover, if he supposes that the name is the same as the thing, he'll either be forced to say that the name is the name of nothing. Now, why is this the case? The name of nothing. The name of no thing. This is a difficult one for me to answer. So let's go back through the exercise. We have established that the name is independent, an abstraction or representation of the thing itself. If the name were a thing itself, I suppose there are 2 ways that my mind goes here. It could be more nameness in orientation or thingness in orientation. But even that is not sufficient to describe it, because a name is a type of thing, I suppose. But it is not an object. So we can say that when these 2 things merge, something is lost of both. My tendency is to say that what merges, or what remains, is the actual object, the physical object. What I completely disperse of is the category or the thing of the name. But if we converge these 2, and we lose the physicality of the object, but the meaning of and the abstraction of the name, we have fallen into this cavernous nothingness, for which both identities cannot be maintained. They've been destroyed. Or else, if he says that it's the name of something, then it's the name of nothing other than itself. And so will turn out to be only a name of a name and nothing else. And so I think our description of this was correct. That if we remove entirely in the path of the name, to the path of the name, away from the physical object, that is the remote, then all we have is the name. And the name not attached to anything, it is attached to nothing, so it is nothing. So I'm debating a little bit whether or not I should read the next 2 pages or just go as I happen, line by line. So I think I'll read these 2 pages and see how it goes. So essentially we'll be having 2 Passovers here. So in response to what the visitor had to say, Theaetetus says yes. The visitor continues, and also the one, being the name of the one, will also be the one of the name. It will have to be. Well then, will they say that the whole is different from the one being, or the same as it? Theaetetus says of course they'll say that it's the same, and they do. But suppose the whole is, as even Parmenides says, all around like the bulk of a well-formed sphere, equal balanced all ways from the middle, since neither anything more must it be, this way or that way, nor anything less. If it's like that, then that which is will have a middle and extremities. And if it has those, then it absolutely has to have parts, doesn't it? Theaetetus says yes. But if a thing has parts, then nothing keeps it from having the characteristic of being one in all its parts. And in that way it's all being, and it's also one whole. Theaetetus says of course. But something with that characteristic can't be just the one itself, can it? Why not? Surely a thing that's truly one, properly speaking, has to be completely without parts. Yes. But a thing like what we've described, which consists of many parts, won't fit that account. I understand. Now if that which is has the characteristic of the one in this way, will it be one and a whole, or shall we simply deny it's a whole at all? Theaetetus says it's a hard choice. You're right. If it has the characteristic of somehow being one, it won't appear to be the same as the one. Moreover, everything will then be more than one. Theaetetus says yes. Further, if that which is not a whole by possessing that as a characteristic, but rather just is the whole itself, that which is will turn out to be less than itself. Certainly. And because it's deprived of itself, that which is will be not being according to that account. Yes. And everything will be more than one, since that which is, and the whole, will each have its own separate nature. Yes. But if the whole is not at all, then the very same things are true of that which is, and in addition to not being, it would not even become a being. Why not? Says Theaetetus. Invariably, whatever becomes has at some point become as a whole, so we can't label either being or becoming as being without taking the whole to be among the beings too. That seems entirely right, says Theaetetus. And moreover, something that isn't a whole can't be of any quantity at all, since something that's of a certain quantity has to be a whole of that quantity, whatever it may be. Exactly. And millions of other issues will also arise, each generating indefinitely many confusions, if you say that being is only two or one. Theaetetus says, the ones that just turned up just show that. One problem led to another, and at each step there was more and more difficulty and uncertainty about what we've just said at the previous stage. The visitor responds, we haven't gone through all the detailed accounts that people give of that which is and that which is not, but this is enough. Now we have to look at the people who discuss the issue in another way. Our aim is to have them all in view, and that way to see that saying that that which is not a bit easier than saying what that which is not is. So we need to go on to these people too, says Theaetetus. The visitor says, it seems that there's something like a battle of gods and giants among them, because of their dispute with each other over being. And Theaetetus says how. One group drags everything down to earth from the heavenly region of the invisible, actually clutching rocks and trees with their hands. When they take hold of all things, they insist that only what offers tangible contact is, since they define being as the same as body. And if any of the others say that something without body is, they absolutely despise him and won't listen to him anymore. So that's the end of these 2 pages. Let's rewind and start to work our way through this and really interpret what is being said here, because I think that we are really starting to get to some interesting topics. So this begins with the visitor saying, and also the one, being the name of the one, will also be the one of the name. Now my apologies, I guess, for my mind and how I wish to approach this, but this is really the only way that my attention will allow me to approach this. So, being as I am, with the beliefs that I have, and I feel a particular way as I begin to express this, even though I don't necessarily know where this is going to take me. I wonder at my life, and I wonder at how many instances, how many different periods that I have gone through in my life, different cycles of opinion, of understanding, of realization, for which I have thought one way or the other about the relationship of being and non-being, about the one and about the many. And even in my lack of explicit thought, verbalization of such concepts, I know that at some level I participate such that I have an opinion about these things. Sort of an implicit way of going about things. Part of my journey religiously has been to build myself, but also to find myself in this strange way. There has been a cultural shift lately through which many of us are enthralled. And I find at times it's difficult to articulate my dissatisfaction with it, and it may manifest against those who I love, but I wish it not to be. I've learned over time to temper this, but when I see it in others, I see it within myself, and I get excited, I get angry, and I know that this is wrong. So why do I bring this up? Why be compelled to say such a thing? Because there's something beautiful in oneness. And I think as we go through not only this dialogue, but the ones that remain, that we have yet to have gone through, there are going to be conversations, personal conversations with myself, perhaps, or with other people, if I bring them on to this podcast. Hopefully I can have conversations with them to bring them into a mutual headspace, a shared headspace, a singular headspace, the headspace of one, perhaps. Where oneness is going to be quite a central figure. Or the one, I should say. So again, going back to the visitor, he says, and also the one, being the name, the one, will also be the one of the name. Now, we're not talking about anything, well, we may at some level, but the thought that the one, the literal, the one had spurred is a bit in the future, I think. What we are speaking of here comes off the heels of where I finished off in terms of that reflection and interpretation. We were thinking about the remote and the name of the remote, and having how you can't have the two be as one, because if that was the case, it would destroy the name, or it would destroy the object. It would create this sort of unstable relationship among the two things, and they would fall into nothingness, into absence. So we're saying, we've heard before that if we go all the way to the name collapses in and on itself because it represents nothing. But now, a different concept seems to be brought forth here, because we have the one. Such a concept I find difficult, because what is the one? Are we talking about the one object, the remote? If we were, the one would now be its name instead of the remote. I don't think that's what we're talking about. It's worth mentioning here that the one is in italics. There are many words that are in italics through this couple pages, and I'll go into that as we progress into it. But it seems that this one is a concept. Speaking about the essence of one, perhaps. The singular. The one being the name of the one. So we have these two identities again. Just as we had the object of the remote and the name, the sort of abstract, thought-based label for the thing. Heaven and earth. And also the one, being the name of the one, will also be the one of the name. So if we take the being and have it so converged onto its name that it is the same thing, can we say of the one that it will not collapse into itself, into nothingness, as we have described with the name of the remote and the remote itself, the object of the remote? So today is a new day. A new day brings new thoughts. And today, I feel a particular way. And I wish that I can articulate the feeling. I'll continue the previous thought in a moment, but it's funny how life can come upon us all of a sudden. Things may seem so routine for such an extended period, and then all of a sudden things become what we might superficially call as real, but everything just seems so immediate, visceral, ready at experience. The heart is active, the mind is attentive, and those questions for which we all know are important but often fall by the wayside because of our commitments to the hustle and bustle of everyday life. These things begin to shine, become attractive again. And perhaps not, I shouldn't be too negative, if that is indeed negative. But I mean to say that there is an aspect of life that is dampened by our regular habits, our regular behaviors. Sometimes it can be the important aspects of life. And right now I feel as though that I am receptive to the important aspects. Whether or not that's going to translate into interesting thoughts, I'm not sure. Or how long this state will persist, again, I'm not sure. But for anyone who may find themselves so far into this that they actually hear these words, I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for your attention. And I think that I'm also thankful for life. I'm thankful for this time. So let's get back into this. I'm going to take this slowly, but hopefully not slowly for the sake of laziness or lethargy, but slowly for the sake of completeness of understanding. So I believe I had left off with the visitor saying, and also the One, being the name of the One, will also be the one of the name. And I gave some explanation, interpretation of what I felt that had meant. Also, sort of a similar state of mind yesterday, for which I thought to myself, how important this idea of oneness is. And just as I was about to say that, I thought about something that I think is related, but I'm not necessarily sure how. Humility comes to mind. When thinking about oneness, I had an experience today for which I should have maintained a degree of selflessness that I did not exercise. And I regret that. But this is a matter of orientation. Oneness surely finds itself in this category, in this domain. I never cease to be amazed at how deeply some of the fundamental concepts that are brought up here can go in mind. And while, as I mentioned, sometimes these things can seem tedious, it is the exercise and the attention, the progress, and the effort through which we extend ourselves that makes all of this worthwhile. I won't go back into interpreting that line, because I've done so already. The visitor says, will they say that the whole is different from the one, being, or the same as it? So while there may not be sort of a definitive or declarative here to really chew on, I don't think it matters all that much. These concepts, I think, are interesting and worthwhile to think about. So the concept of the whole of something. In simplistic terms, when we think about the whole like a pie, it has different slices, but together they make up that which is the pie. The whole is usually composed of parts. There are many different types of wholes that we can imagine. We can imagine a nation, a people, a self, an object, a machine. And it's sort of at this juncture that I wish for a progression into a subtlety that we have yet to find. The whole and the one. I'm looking for a conversation about participation and of relation. But this way of coming to understand is a slow march. They say that the whole is different from the one being, or is it the same? Theaetetus confirms, at least he believes, that it is the same. But suppose a whole is, as Parmenides says, all around like the bulk of a well-formed sphere, equal balanced, always from the middle, since neither anything more must it be, this way or that way, nor anything less. So what is this then? We have a particular concept of the whole. Something that comes to mind immediately is the Old Testament, of which we have spent a significant amount of time exploring. And in the Old Testament, we are confronted with these ideas. But we're also exposed to the dangers of what I might just sort of call, maybe as a placeholder, relativistic thinking. That is on one hand, and then perhaps on the other hand, that at these principled levels, we describe the pillars, the columns, the principles in one way, we give it one name, but another person may call it by another name, but still maintain a conception of that principle. This I find odd, in the sense that there can be a concept that spurs such deep thought about something, but can have a potential for meaning many different things. And here comes into view matters of falsity, of misalignment or malalignment, of trying to understand something, of having an idea of a particular type of appearance, but the appearance does not match a particular type of experience, which may also be seen as another type of appearance. While it may not be wrong in a sense, it may be wrong if it's connected to other things in a particular pattern or sequence. So what do I mean by that? Why am I speaking this way? I don't mean to say that Parmenides is necessarily wrong, but I wish to say that in contrast of what I was thinking about a moment ago with regard to the whole, I think Parmenides' description is different. It's not the same. Mine may be more simplistic. I don't know. But it's quite a geometrical opinion of what the whole is. It's very uniform. It's cut out in the abstract sphere. Something that we, with regard to wholeness, perhaps conceptually understand and can be quite, I don't want to say calculated, computed, but conceptualized, I think, is a good way to put it. Whereas in our experience, something of a well-formed sphere doesn't take many physical forms, but it is within our conceptions of things and of our organizing them in mind that they become quite formal and precise. All around, like the bulk of a well-formed sphere, equal balanced all ways from the middle. Since neither anything more must it be, this way or that way, nor anything less. So there's an idea of oneness, I think, that permeates this expression. That it is as it is. It has its dimensions. It has consistency. Equal balanced, all ways from the middle. And there's an idea of being for the sake of simplicity or for the sake of necessity, for the sake of reason, perhaps. Neither anything more must it be. Its form as it is necessary. It is sufficient, maybe I should say. This way or that way, nor anything less. If it's like that, says the visitor, then that which is will have a middle and extremities. And here again I think about the various directions that we could go, the direction that I just went when I interpreted that verse. Now the visitor is going in a different direction. He's identifying the sort of the structure, conceptual structure of the sphere that's outlined by Parmenides. He identifies the middle and the extremities. And if it has those, then it absolutely has to have parts, doesn't it? So while although I may have been operating under the assumption that the whole has parts to begin with, what this conjures up in mind is the tendency to get lost in the multiplicity or the small and the perhaps never-ending smallness of identity at the expense of understanding or seeing oneness among the many. But if a thing has parts, then nothing keeps it from having the characteristic of being one in all its parts. And in that way, it's all being, and it's also one whole. So how might we understand this? It's a bit confusing. There is the claim that if something is made of other things, then there is no thing keeps it from having the characteristic of being one in all its parts. So I think we do have an interesting progression here. There's a recognition that there's really nothing that would limit us from understanding that a thing that has parts, things that are, it wouldn't be a requirement for the absence of something to refuse their unification into one thing. But we know, obviously, if we just open our eyes, as I look in front of me now, there are plenty of items on my desk, each one of them distinct, having its own form, shape, color, purpose. Many of them have particular parts to them. But the part of one thing does not add to the part of another thing to make it into one being. And there is a reason for that. And I suppose we can ask the question, why? Why is it the case that among all of the different parts that we have difference in identity? Here I think about a few different things. One, I think about oneness as a series of graduated participations in which the human being, the one that is speaking, is observing and participating at a particular level of oneness, while there may be a broader whole that this agent participates in. The agent itself is an identity, is one with a varying degree of participations within it. And that the objects, or anything else that we can imagine, of many things with many parts, many singular beings that comprise the name one or oneness, they too, their parts participate in themselves, but they also are related to some other way of wholeness that my flashlight that's on my desk participates in a broader gathering of parts. It serves some purpose. It may sit there unused forever, but it still participates. It still has that capacity. The visitor says, but something with that characteristic can't be just one in itself, can it? Surely a thing that's truly one, properly speaking, has to be completely without parts. But a thing like that we've described, which consists of many parts, won't fit that account. On some level, it's difficult to maintain the argument that something, in order for something to be one, it cannot have any parts. That there has to be this purity of being. While conceptually that may be the case, we could take any physical structure and break it down farther and farther and farther and realize that it is a thing of parts. So the one is becoming an ideal, a form, the purity of unity. And in the next statement by the visitor, we see this differentiation. Now, if that which is has the characteristic of the one in this way, will it be one and a whole? Or shall we simply deny it's a whole at all? What I find a bit interesting is that there is this distinction. If that which is has the characteristic of the one. So that would seem to indicate that that which is being thought of now, at least as a possibility, as being a part of some greater whole. But we can also say that which is the one. So that can be kind of confusing. If it has the characteristics of somehow being one, it won't appear to be the same as the one. Why would this be the case? Because a characteristic perhaps is but a part of oneness and not oneness itself. Moreover, everything will then be more than one. Because a characteristic, again, is a part. And if there is a part, there has to be more than one for it to be a part of something. If that which is not a whole by possessing that as a characteristic, so just pausing there for a second. If that which is not a whole by possessing that as a characteristic, so we mean to say that the whole does not possess oneness, but rather just is the whole itself. That which is will turn out to be less than itself. Now, what does that mean? Okay, so we're taking a moment here because today is a new day. A break in the previous thought to establish a new line of thinking and a refreshed mind, even though that now it's in the evening, it's after work. There has been a considerable amount of energy spent since the time that I woke up until now. It's been, I don't know how long it's been, 13 hours in this wakeful state. But nonetheless, I feel energized and ready to explore a little bit more. And I wonder, just like yesterday when I approached this anew, I had a particular feeling in mind, and I'm thankful that that feeling has not really left me. It's a feeling of wonder, I suppose, curiosity, divine inspiration, maybe, I don't know, or not in the sense that I'm divine, but a divine hand. I feel like I'm pushed to think about the existential, to think about the topics that are being discussed here. Just a moment ago, I got lost in this state of mind. I wonder if this is familiar to anybody, but I got lost in that state of mind imagining different scenarios, just letting my mind have its way with whatever it wants to chew on. And it's so strange, the things that it makes up, the different scenarios that it wishes to find itself in, or the conversations that it believes that it might have if the conditions are right. But at a certain point, it's a waste of time, and I need to move on and do something productive. So here we are on this new day. So I'd like to break down that last bit of a dialogue by the visitor, something I don't really understand. If that which is not a whole, by possessing that as a characteristic. Okay, so I think I spoke of this. This sort of made sense to me, but I need to make sense of it again to get my mind back on track. When he's saying, if that which is not a whole by possessing that as a characteristic, he's speaking of the whole. I'm hoping that the other day that I am staying consistent with this, but I have to ask the question, if we take that which is, and we ask ourselves about the relationship of that which is to the whole, what would we say? Well, we'd have to give ourselves some sort of context, otherwise we're floating in this barren landscape. There's not much there. So we take one thing, let's say. I'll try not to get too confused based on the arguments that are taking place here. But let's say I grab one thing off of my desk. I have a piece of paper. It is a piece of notebook paper. It's maybe a fifth of the notebook paper. I cut it vertically to use as a bookmark. Now this is something that is. It is also something that represents a whole of this thing. But also, I could say that it is a thing that was of a whole. That it was of a whole piece of paper, let's say. But depending on the context, depending on how I see this thing, it may change, I think. In the following sense, that now as I hold this thing, as I picked it up initially, what I thought was, that which is, this thing, is not a part of a whole, but it is a whole, because I identify it now as a bookmark. I identify it as its purpose or its function. It wasn't until I really started to think about it that I realized that this is a part of a broader whole, a broader sheet of notebook paper. So I can ask myself the question, I can go run through the exercise that we are being exposed to here. He says, if that which is not a whole by possessing that as a characteristic. So I know this continues on to a further thought, but conceptually I want to grasp this. So my answer to this question of, is it possible for that which is to not be possessed by a whole as a characteristic? I would say that it depends as a matter of context. In the absolute sense, this thing does not represent, it does not have the whole of a particular wholeness, let's say like the sheet of paper. But the sheet of paper itself doesn't occupy the wholeness that it once belonged to, which is of the notebook. And we could say the notebook doesn't occupy the wholeness as a part of more fundamental elements. If it's made of paper, let's say, there's the tree that was cut down to make the paper, wherever we choose to go with it. There's this line of reasoning that draws us to to things that the pieces were once a part of, but they can transform into their own wholeness, their own identity, given the purpose. But rather just is the whole itself. That which is will turn out to be less than itself. Okay, so let's go through, but rather just is the whole itself. Now, I suppose it could be kind of confusing if we think of the whole as a part, the whole as a characteristic. We can say that there are many characteristics to this piece of paper: the color, the dimensions, again, the wholeness or the aspect of it. There's a range of dimensions through which we can observe something and measure it, more specifically in the scientific context at least. But rather is just the whole itself. Now here we are referring to oneness, and actually initially I deleted a segment of my reflection, thinking about what the first part of this statement was talking about when he said, if that which is not a whole by possessing that. I was thinking that might refer to something other than the whole, which in the previous dialogue by the visitor he says, you're right, if it has the characteristic of somehow being one. Now there's this relationship between the oneness and wholeness, of course. But it would seem, at least in my interpretation, that the whole itself, if the whole is not just a characteristic, but is the one, then that which is will turn out to be less than itself. Now that's the most confusing part about this, at least to me. And the way that I'm trying to understand this, or approaching understanding maybe, or failing to understand it, so if we take this piece of paper and we say that this is something, and it is the whole of itself, we would necessarily say that it is less, that which is will turn out to be less than itself, because in a way it is. It was a part of a greater whole, the greater part of the page, which is part of the notebook, which is part of some broader fundamental physical objects and underlying physical properties and all this sort of thing. The visitor says, and because it's deprived of itself, that which is will be non-being, or that which is will be not being, according to that account. Now that doesn't make sense, but I think, at least, but we can follow it to the point where, the logical point where we have been. So there is something about denying the identity, the full relatedness of that which is, that gives us the perception that although it exists, because maybe in the conceptual sphere, there is this thing that exists that is independent of everything else, it is not possible to be, because of the absence of that relation to other things. He says everything will be more than one, since that which is and the whole will each have its own separate nature. So what is meant by this, that which is and the whole? Now, again, we can say that this bookmark is a thing that is. We can say that the whole is the broader context, the broader, I could say, physical landscape, the broader physical relationship landscape as it relates to the full piece of notebook paper. And even other types of relations. It doesn't have to be linearly down itself. It could be as it's related to a conscious agent that uses it for a particular purpose. Without me, it wouldn't have been separated from that wholeness. It wouldn't have been given a new wholeness. So there is this hypothetical split that's happening in this conversation. The split is between that which is and the wholeness, the environment for which that which is participates in. So we seem to be in this primordial state of understanding, of coming to know, coming to be, but we can't force ourselves to come into being without being related to other things. We can't have this separate nature. But if the whole is not at all, then the very same things are true of that which is, and in addition to not being, it would not even become a being. So what do we say about this? But if the whole is not at all, this is an interesting hypothetical. If we take this bookmark, we destroy its relations of where it came from. The visitor says that the very same things are true of that which is, again the bookmark. And in addition to not being, because it wouldn't be without its former relations, it would not even become a being, exactly. Why not, says Theaetetus. Invariably, whatever becomes has at some point become as a whole. So we can't label either being or becoming as being without taking the whole to be among the beings too. So whatever becomes has at some point become as a whole. This is what we've discussed before. This bookmark is from the whole piece of paper, and it has come to be its new identity through that trajectory, through that succession, the sort of the genealogy of the bookmark. So we can't label either being or becoming as being without taking the whole to be among the beings too. So I think this follows logically, doesn't really need any explanation. He says, moreover, something that isn't a whole can't be of any quantity at all, since something that's of a certain quantity has to be a whole of that quantity, whatever it may be. So here we get into our mathematical logic. Let's take it from the top. So something that isn't a whole can't be of any quantity at all. So what is a quantity? So quantity is a property or characteristic of a physical object or phenomenon that can be measured, counted, or quantified. And it typically has two parts: a numerical value, which is how much it is, and the unit of measurement, what it's measured in. An example would be 5 meters. 5 is the numerical value, meters is the unit. So let's take the first part of that statement. Something that isn't a whole can't be of any quantity at all. So a wholeness, as I think we've described, is something that comes to be. It's something that is. Like, again, for example, my bookmark. It is a whole. but it is from another aspect, another whole. It is something that is. Now, if it was not itself, if it was not the thing that is, if it was not a whole, if it didn't have its connections, then there's no way I can identify it. It would be no thing. There would be no number, there would be no oneness to it. There would be no length in terms of the length of this paper. There would be no unit of measurement, in other words. I could take a particular tone or a word that I speak and say the same thing about that word. There's a wholeness to the word. It's related to other words, so it can be. There's a particular volume that's associated with it, but again, if it is something that is not itself, it cannot be. And I think that there are some qualifying statements to that, but we leave that as it is. Since something that's of a certain quantity has to be a whole of that quantity, whatever it may be. Something that's of a certain quantity. So we have one bookmark. It has to be a bookmark. It has to be a whole bookmark. The visitor continues, and millions of other issues will also arise, each generating indefinitely many confusions, if you say that being is only two or one. It's fascinating how quickly I forget where the central place of our discussion is. I'm reminded that now we are talking about these Greek colonies and the way that they view things. And we are disassembling, perhaps, or fighting with, wrestling with that idea of saying being is only two or being is only one. So forgive me, but today is a new day, and a new day brings new thoughts. Luckily, I think I finished off at a point where the thoughts had essentially come to an end on that particular day. They could have assumed a new form, of course, if we kept going, but I think they stopped right at a good point. Because we finish with the visitor saying, and millions of other issues will also arise, each generating indefinitely many confusions, if you say that being is only two or one. And every time this happens in the Platonic dialogues, this sort of slowdown, we're going to go through this process of new questioning or reorientation, either redirecting the mind towards where we have been and where we have become, where we have gotten to, or we look to a new line of questioning after a different line has been explored. And sometimes it is not the case that we have exhausted it in totality, but rather sometimes what we have explored, although may not be conclusive. And again, I should say that the participant in the dialogue, the reader of the dialogue, ought to participate, ought to understand their own path. Often the Platonic dialogues end in this sort of unresolved note, so it's up to the reader to come to understand something and to implement, because life is a series of implementations and practices. We have to go through things many times for them to fortify themselves in our being, and it requires a lot of attention to detail. A written dialogue probably does best to end on that open question, but it is not a waste of time because we have been active participants. If we're not active and we are just passive, we will not gain anything. We will not achieve anything, and that includes understanding with regard to, I think, this cognitive landscape and intellectual affairs, but also in the physical domain, in life, with the body, and with business, etc. We haven't gone through all the detailed accounts that people give of that which is and that which is not, but this is enough. Now we have to look at the people who discuss the issue in another way. Our aim is to have them all in view, and that way to see that saying what that which is isn't a bit easier than saying what that which is not is. So what can we say here of this expression? We have the ending and then the beginning of something, I think, in the middle of this. We have a recognition of where we have not been, although we haven't gone through the detailed accounts that people give of that which is and that which is not. It's enough. It would be superfluous to do much more. So we stop there. Now we have to look at the people who discuss the issue in another way. So here's the new, here's the change, the new direction. Our aim is to have them all in view. Now what is all of them? It would seem that we are trying to identify a principle that would give us a bigger picture. So we have to ascend somehow. We have to go up this sort of purposeful wisdom ladder for which we can see the various nodes in the network, but also know enough about their interrelatedness to connect them in a way that makes sense. It may be the case in the process of doing so, we find ourselves in disagreement about some established idea, or we may affirm what some other idea has to say. Our aim is to have them all in view, and that way to see that saying what that which is. I think there's a typo here. I want to read it as it is, but again it says, our aim is to have them all in view, and that way to see that saying what that which is isn't a bit easier than saying that which is not is. So I lied. It's not a typo, but it's just a little confusing to say, and I said it wrong the first time. So let's break down that rather confusing statement. And that way to see that saying what that which is. Okay, so let's focus on that. That which is. It seems like a simple enough statement, but it's one of those statements that are, I think, connected to so many lines of thought and beliefs for which we do not trace them back to their roots, because it's not necessary. It would take too many cognitive resources to do so, but it is a fundamental engine, a fundamental driver of understanding and of seeing the world, I think. It's an important question, or an important statement. That which is. So let's speak a little bit about that which is, then. We've been many places. One of the difficulties that I find, and perhaps this is unique to my mind and my limitations in understanding, but I find that so many territories can be explored and can be gone over, and yet at the same time, perspective, or perhaps encountering certain elements in different environments just slightly different, cause for a whole new grounds of exploration and mental exercise. We've been speaking for some time about that which is and that which is not. And even now I have to wonder at the place to go, at the approach I should take. Our aim is to have them all in view, and that way to see that saying what that which is. When I think about existence, I think about being. I have to Not sure if this is the correct state of mind or the correct orientation of mind, but I instinctively go to something that's in front of me, something that I can hold on to. And I think I do that because I feel like I'm grounded. I know where I am. I know what key I'm in. I know my home base. My mind doesn't drift away into this realm of abstraction and of unknown things, not grounded to anything certain or secure. I find myself on a plane of existence, one that my body is tied to. In order for me to understand being, I have to see it through this lens and through this prism. The things that I interact with are like these tools, the tools that store understanding. I can innately pick up this remote and I can feel its weight. I can feel the texture of the object. And I can understand its purpose to use for other things in the physical environment. That which is. As if the question would be that this thing could be other than it is. Again, in some conceptual sphere, we've been over this situation. As we, as spiritual beings, bring our spirit to the physical world, we begin to ask questions about the purpose of things, the relatedness among things, and among the things that we devise and participate with. We understand also that these things are related to other things in important ways. It is by their relations that we understand that we, rather, can behave in a broader scope of action. There are many domains through which I think this is true. It's true of the remote, as I can turn on the television. I can use the television for particular purposes. I happen to use it only for my desktop to project the screen. I can also use a particular type of expertise in the labor market and to build things, to create things that were before my conception unknown. And so there is a subtlety, I think, when one is involved with thinking about that which is, both in the physical domain but also in the spiritual domain. Because we can say of the spiritual domain, maybe more specifically in the domain of thought, that an idea of the physical world come to be is not something that is. It's only until the thing that becomes is, or becomes in the physical world is. But of course that's not true. If there was not some sort of existence prior to the existence of this remote, then the remote would not come into being. There has to be this agent that formulates it. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily separate from the physical world at all. Only separate by degrees. Degrees of what? I guess it depends on the dimension that we wish to use, but if we use a dimension such as tangible, and by tangible maybe we would say weight, we would say texture, we would say color, many different things that we can measure and observe. Measuring and observing thoughts is much more difficult, because the being that's responsible for seeing them can automatically compute a vast amount of information, a vast amount of information that's related to other information, that's pre-assumed. In order to understand a thought in the context of other thoughts, and a broader identity of self, I think is a difficult thing to do. And so by degrees, that which is different to comprehend. That which is can be in mind and not come into physical being. But that which is in the physical world may not necessarily come into mind. There are plenty of physical objects in the world that I'm completely unaware of, or that I once was aware of, but I've forgotten because of lack of relevance. That which isn't a bit easier than saying what that which is not is. And so in no way do we identify these two statements to be simple, that one is ruling over another, at least in terms of this dialogue. But it's an important thing to think about why it isn't a bit easier to think about that which is versus saying that which is not is. It seems like it's contradictory to say that which not is, but much in the way that which is true in the spiritual dimension, but yet to manifest in the physical, at least as we experience it. We can say it's strange of the concept of that which is not to exist in a state that all we really perceive is that which is. But of course there are many things that are not. There are many things that can be not. I can be not, just as much as I can produce an artificial intelligence software for my job and revolutionize the industry. And it could be a thing, it could be tangible, it can have many physical components. I can find myself in a state of understanding that at some stage I will not be, that I will be not. And I know that this is to come, this will be, this absence, that which is not will come to be. There is a very real sense about the being of absence. And the way it exists isn't quite readily understandable by the mind, but it isn't also necessary for us to experience the thingness of nothingness. We experience it in our own ways, I suppose. I have family members that have passed away over the years, and their thingness has turned into nothingness. Their presence is gone. Their personalities cease to be within my presence. Their memory still lives on, of course. There is that force. There is that idea. The fading away of being in the physical world, held on to mind in that dimension. In other words, thingness remains. Now, this process of absence, while it may be absolute in my mind, I have beliefs that are broader, perhaps, that still submit no thingness to thingness, in a sense, in a way. But it is by the very expression of saying that which is not is, I think, an identification of its submission to that which is, because it is, even though it represents the process, the coming to be of absence. It represents that sort of in-between, the liminal, the change in state between things. And I rather like this expression of reorientation on the part of the visitor. It seems that there's something like a battle of the gods and giants among them because of their dispute with each other over being. And it's easy, in mind, to imagine this conceptual landscape. Questions obviously come to the type of agency that are attributed to these gods. Because, of course, the forces here that we identify are something that is not very similar to the experience of man. These forces are quite natural. They are perhaps personal in a sense, because these principles find themselves in the personal dimension. So perhaps I'll have to modify my explanation here a little bit. It's a bizarre thing. It's easy to move on without grace in hand, and I think that is a punishing pursuit. I've been guilty of it this week, of not taking grace with me, letting my patience be destroyed by some superficial passion. Now, based on this, we can explore one of the more interesting expressions of the visitor. One group drags everything down to earth from the heavenly region of the invisible, actually clutching rocks and trees with their hands. When they take hold of all of these things, they insist that only what offers tangible contact is, since they define being as the same as body. And if any of the others say that something without a body is, they absolutely despise him and won't listen to him anymore. So I'll finish this episode with some thoughts about this last bit of dialogue by the visitor. It's interesting that this is broken up into two groups. That is to say, how we see a group in the former bit of dialogue that says, that which is, and that which is not is. The first group that the visitor mentions drags everything down to earth from the heavenly region of the invisible. So the first thing that I would like to pause and to consider is the heavenly region. I find it interesting that many cultures have hypothesized of this heavenly region. I think in many respects, the view of heaven changes through different seasons of life. At least our perception of it changes. And I can't say that all the time I feel myself thinking about a particular place that is heaven. Rather a state or a plane. The region, as it is mentioned here, of the invisible. So what exactly then can we see from this image? Drags everything down to earth from the heavenly region. Everything could be literally everything. The material, consciousness, life. Actually clutching rocks and trees with their hands. When they take hold of all these things, they insist that only what offers tangible contact is. Tangible. An interesting word. Now, the word tangible, it is defined as something that is perceptible by touch, able to be physically felt. Real or concrete, not abstract or illusory. So from Middle English we have able to be touched and material. From Latin, we have that which can be touched, and it continues from the verb to touch. And the Latin suffix is capable of, or the ability to be. So I can't deny the fundamentality of the experience of the body. I think in cases of the extremities, or the extremes maybe, that's not the same thing, out at the periphery we find ourselves at risk for extremes. I think of the extreme of abstraction, but also the extreme of physical input. Much like the scenario that we had earlier about the name of the object and the object itself, there's a physical reality to things, and there's this spread through which I find that my mind, at least, is working to comprehend how this experience and how awareness, consciousness is related, and how it integrates into this material, tangible world that we find ourselves in. But my mind still goes back to the introduction of this group. That is, that they drag everything down from the heavenly to the earth. And I have to imagine that this is the group of that which is, if we are to break it down in those categories. They insist that only what offers tangible contact is, since they define being as the same as body. The conception of man as spirit, as part spiritual being and part material being, is something that comes to mind. For my part, I recognize, as a part of my experience, I cannot abandon my body. There's no way for me to do so, nor really is there any desire to do so. But of the material experience, it's also hard to deny the wonder that is created by the gathering of material in certain ways to produce mind, or to have mind be reflected in it. They define being as the same as body. Body in and of itself, I think, is a reduced conception. The physicality of things, although necessary for agents, is but one component of their being. I don't wish to separate body and mind too much, however, but there is important delineations. That of the body is an extension of mind, in a way, in the sense that, as a matter of purpose, the mind is the thing that occupies that which is most meaningful, that which is most goal-directed, while the various cells in the body are certainly goal-directed to maintain the appearance of the body, to maintain the structure and the function of the body. The mind is the overall driver of all of that interactive exchanging of information and material information. And surely it could be said at the base of mind, there is this body aspect that is driving it, the mind operates on those laws of bodily function and of nature. And if any of the others say that something without a body is, they absolutely despise him and won't listen to him anymore. Now, next episode we will get into the people on the other side, and we'll continue our dialogue. But for now, I'm going to end this episode here.